So how does your family imprint affect your relationship choices? That is the topic today. Our parents really are our first love, and our experience with them creates our relationship blueprint. And believe it or not, trauma within family changes the way our DNA expresses, and it's shared with the following generation. So if you've ever had like lots of family members in trauma and, grandparents, uncles, aunts, that's probably where it came from. So that's going to continue to influence until it's resolved. And this is our opportunity to do that. So I am really pleased to have Joanna Lynn here. And welcome, Joanna. So glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Stacey. I love the idea of your summit, and it's great to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. So Joanna's an expert in this, and I'm really pleased to bring her here to visit with you because she's got 20 years expertise in resolving inherited family patterns. And she's the founder of the Family Imprint Institute with an international private practice. And the thing is, she's really committed to resolving painful patterns from living out in the next generation as if on repeat. If she had a superpower, it would have to be listening like a detective to the facts of your family history. The words you use to describe your challenges lead her directly to where the most effective resolution is for you. And I absolutely love that. The intention with her work is to contribute to world peace, one family at a time. And you're certainly doing that with thousands of people here in this summit. So thank you for doing that.
It's the thing I love to do most of all. So thanks for inviting me in.
So first of all, tell us a little bit more about your practice and what you're doing, and then we'll ask you some questions.
That sounds great. So as you described earlier, I work with people all over the world. All we need is an internet connection these days, and the world just gets that much smaller. And so the idea with my work is to really track some family patterns. So I think people who are used to seeing a therapist, they really have this kind of refreshed feeling because it's not about digging into the story. It's about actually sourcing some of the family facts so we can put the puzzle pieces, the larger puzzle piece together. So the things that maybe it wasn't even as intense as a trauma in the family system, but it's just an unresolved experience. Like grandma had anxiety, mom had it, so no wonder you worry a lot. We track these things that we no longer want to keep in our lives. And really that's what the session is all about. People kind of bring forward their greatest challenge, and we track that challenge as far back as we need to go to really find the resolution.
Right. So let's dig into some relationship stuff with our current relationships. What influences our relationship choices? Because a lot of us have made some pretty poor choices. So what influences those choices on a subconscious level?
Well, what I often joke with some of my clients, I'll say, if we were to go out to a party with 100 eligible bachelors or bachelorettes, depending on who's listening, it doesn't matter. They're all equally attractive. They all have great jobs. It's not about any of the surface stuff. Why do we have that click with one person? And it usually has to do with what's unresolved in our family of origin and also the other partner. So it's like, wow, we come together as a way to sort out what's been left unsaid, unresolved, what still is a overarching hurt. So let's say as an example, we had a workaholic dad who was never really around. And so why does it seem that we're drawn to partners who are always traveling with their work or always behind their phone or the computer? It seems that these things get recreated. And on some level, there's some part of us that knows that, which is why we've got that click with that certain someone and maybe not, others.
Right.
Why do we lean in? And then we kind of live through some of these familiar patterns, relationship after relationship, until we really come to understand, oh, wait, I'm the common denominator. I've got to kind of look at what part I'm bringing into the table because I don't want to do this anymore.
And even we're drawn to those things, even if they're negative, right? Even if we didn't like that our father was gone all the time, or anger is a lot of times a huge issue with people within families. my parents were angry, or one of them was, and so I'm marrying somebody who is angry. And we don't like that, but we're attracted to that. Why in the world is that?
Well, it's familiar. So it goes back to that subconscious imprint. And so what is familiar? So for some of us, love gets mixed up with self-sacrifice, or, do we take care of a sad mom, or do we walk on eggshells around an angry dad?
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets kind of wired into what love is. And it's funny you say that too, because I was just this morning, I was with a client and she said, but it wasn't like this in the beginning. We're all on our best behavior in that dating. But I believe there's something deeper inside of us that sort of knows, and, we can get locked into these places. And so much of the time, what the repetitive struggle is in that relationship is exactly what's unresolved in your family of origin. So, it's just way too much of a coincidence to not really find the root of resolution back in our family.
And I know there are people listening who have had multiple relationships, either boyfriends, girlfriends, multiple spouses. I certainly have. And we seem to repeat the same things. I'm like, what in the world? There's something going on. I don't want that. But then I seem to be attracting this without knowing it. So, how do our earliest experiences influence how we show up in our relationships?
Well, that is really what's influencing all of those knee-jerk reactions, So if our spouse is late for dinner, is our first instinct to think, oh, he must be being unfaithful? Or do we think, oh, he's probably stuck in traffic? We've got one of two options to sort of go down. And what is that trajectory for you? What's typical of your thinking? And where does that come from is really back into our earliest experience. And I think it's one of the most overlooked things in coaching and therapy, and the way, because we don't know how to go into this session with that expert to ask for that help. And so it's so common, in fact, in my body of work, we call it a break in the bond. So this can happen, Stacey, as early as in utero, or at our time of birth, or our first few years of life. So this feeling that mom and baby are so symbiotically connected in the womb in those first few years that our brain literally patterns after our primary caregiver. So you have to go right back to work, within 6 weeks. Was she physically there, but maybe moving through postpartum depression, or perhaps the sibling before you died, or there was a miscarriage? What is being carried for the mom? Maybe you're 2 months old and her mom gets an awful diagnosis. So where are the splits in her attention that is sort of what every little baby needs to thrive?
Right.
And so that really sets up this unconscious imprint of what is love. Love means distance, or love means anger mixed in, or love is just inconsistent. And so when we've got these early origins, and for many of us, we don't have conscious memory. So sometimes we've got to go back, and if our parents still aren't here with us, maybe asking aunts, siblings, you become your own detective of your family history to try to find out why, with this partner I'm really interested in, when we get close, when the commitment gets on the table, do I feel like I want to jump out of the back of my body and get out of here? What are some of the things your body is telling you with regards to how you feel inside relationship?
Right. Is it, and I've heard before too, it might even be just a micro movement or of your mother's face or your father's face, or like a particular tone of the voice. And even, like you said, in utero, that's what we can hear, or, as tiny babies, we can see that. And that's what affects us. That's how we bring that into adulthood.
Yeah, so that's the origin of it. So our ears are the first senses of all to be developed. And so right away, we're hearing into this environment. Are mom and dad yelling with each other? Do I have, 6 other siblings I'm going to have to fight for what I need? All of this is really well known to the child. Now, at 7 months gestation, our amygdala, which is our emotional center of the brain, is fully formed. So we have every idea of what is mom feeling. Is she ready, either to be mom or to add another child to the mix?
Right.
Gosh, did dad just lose his job and they're in survival? So before we've even taken our first breath, we have a very good indicator of what we're going to be born into, what's maybe expected of us. We've got this real indication of, am I loved? Am I wanted? Or does this feel more like a burden? And so a lot of the times of, am I good enough, can be sourced from that place. Am I loved? And so this lays down the very deepest sort of blueprint of what we look to recreate in our lives. And this goes far beyond our relationships. It sort of lives in that place of, do I trust life?
Right.
If I didn't really feel like I ever got enough love and attention from my mom, it often relays in our relationship with money, of never enough money or never enough clients. And so a lot of the times we can track back that early imprint even far beyond relationships.
Wow. When you're talking about relationships, and sometimes we do have difficult relationships with one or both parents, and that also affects us. What is the first step to heal how that does, so you don't start repeating those patterns or keep repeating those patterns?
That's it. And, I speak with many clients who almost want to come forward and preface it with, yeah, but you don't know my mom, or you didn't know what my dad did.
Right.
And I think regardless of what happened, I think what's most important in our road to recovery and really integration of the experiences in our lives is actually less about what happened. And that might surprise some of your listeners, but it's much more about how we're holding on to what happened.
Right.
And a lot of the times I'll work with my clients around, let's pretend we're going to take 100 steps back from this situation so we can get a really full picture view. And so if you're telling me as a client, gosh, no matter what I could do for my mom was never enough, or, oh, my dad was so controlling, he was, the most authoritarian parent you could ever imagine. Well, let's understand why. What's behind mom's criticism?
Right.
Why was dad so controlling? Was he grown up in the military, or was his dad, did he lose his dad at a very early age? And so now he feels like if he can just keep control of, bedtimes, or I don't know, what's for dinner, what's being served, that somehow everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And so we really want to build some sort of compassion, some sort of understanding for how our parents parented us. Because if we stay in the fact that it's personal and they did this to me, we can't help but recreate it in some way. Because we continue to feel, I hate to use the word victimized, but we stay stuck in, they did this to me, therefore I'm always going to be out there looking for my love interest to fill what they couldn't. And there's red flag number 1.
And that's like subconscious. You don't think that out loud or consciously. That's just something happening inside of you that is telling yourself that, right? And you don't even usually know that's what's happening, right?
Yeah. Well, and let's give it the example of those knee-jerk responses. So if he hasn't called back in 2 days, what happens? Or if he calls too much, what's going on in your body? So it comes down to even the body sensations, the repetitive things we think, and our knee-jerk reactions to what happens. This is all in the way we sort of navigate our relationships, and even how we deal with separations.
Wow. So I know every family has a pattern as you grow up. Like, you said, if you are number 2 or number 6 in the family, or you're, power and control patterns, those type of things as well. What do those patterns in our family have to do with how we show up in our relationships?
So I think it's a very universal question, and it really very much depends on the person and what they bring forward. But I think what we end up doing is, so let's say we'll use that example of taking care of a sad mom or a depressed mom. We likely become the person in the relationship who's the responsible one, the highly effective one, the one everyone can go to. But after a very short period of time, becomes the one who feels resentful for having everything on their plate.
Right.
So there's this sort of imbalance in the relationship because that person who took care of a sad parent becomes what I call the big one in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're big with our parents, we don't really know how to come into balance in a couple relationship. We don't trust that they're going to have our back because our parents sometimes couldn't.
Mm.
And so we kind of go over and above, and, you know, it's often the overgiver that actually collapses the relationship.
Mm.
The other side doesn't know how to make up the balance, doesn't feel like they could ever catch up.
Or know that there's an imbalance
and so
there.
It's, again, even to know it, exactly. Yeah. And so they unconsciously pull away out of a sense of emotional indebtedness. Mm-hmm. And so it's just easier if I go than try to make up the balance. Or as you say, something's just off and I don't know how to get back on track.
Right. You know, what's going through my mind right now is I think pretty much almost every Hollywood movie ever made has this stuff in there, that people playing out those patterns of their families' relationship.
It's almost like you come into my living room. I always laugh with my husband that there's got to be a constellator that's, you know, writing this stuff because it's so rich in these philosophies. Exactly.
Real life stuff. So how can we get rid of that? What can we do about some of these unresolved issues? And because, you know, nobody wants that affecting their relationships. Nobody wants to get involved in relationships with narcissists and sociopaths. Nobody wants that. We all want love. We want a great and balanced relationship. So what can we do about that?
Of course. It's one thing to understand where it comes from, and then we just want to go, okay, now what? Right. And so what we know in the family of origin work, now keep in mind, this work has been around almost 50 years. So this is not just what I've noticed in my practice. This is hundreds of thousands of people. And so I just want your listeners to kind of rest into the fact that it's been tried and true and proven. Mm-hmm. And we know that if we leave a family member out of our heart, so namely a parent, if we judge, reject, or really feel very much hurt that there's a lot of unresolved stuff there. So at the end of the day, if love can't flow, let's say between my mom and I, or my dad and I am bound to repeat that in my love relationships or with my children. And so what do we do about that is generating a new inner image of how we hold that parent inside. Right. And so for many of my clients, I'll say, I'm not going to Sunday dinner. I'm not getting back into a relationship with this person. And in some cases, that's the way it needs to be. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking anybody to step out in front of, you know, a moving freight train to get, you know, run over by a complicated relationship. Right. But what I am saying is we have the ability to, let's use the example of a critical mom. And every time you're back with her, there's more and more criticism. And you notice in your marriage, you're being highly criticized, bombarded all the time. So let's take it outside of the issue of the relationship for a moment. You go back into the understanding of what's behind my mom's criticism. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, grandma was so bitter, was so traumatized by, I don't even know, losing grandpa in war, or grandpa always had affairs and could never be trusted, right. And grandma had to do everything on her own. So as we begin to recognize, oh my gosh, how could mom really have been any other way? Mm-hmm. There's that part of us that almost can look at our mom to say, what if all of those criticisms, all those hurtful words actually weren't even addressed to me? There were all the unsaid things that she couldn't say to her own mom.
Right.
And so we gain a different understanding. And even if we can go back to those it's almost like we want to go back to what the brain can't argue with. Because any of us who's made it to our 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, somebody cared for us. Somebody tucked us in.
Right.
Somebody bathed us. Somebody fed us when we were hungry. And so to go back to, maybe my mom was overly critical and had a hard time making it in life, but she gave me this life. She took care of me as an infant. And here I am today. And I think for many people, it can feel like, okay, so maybe I visualize this, maybe I receive the gift of life from my mom, even with all of its consequences. But how do we bring that in kind of an action-orientated way into our lives? And the thing that's really worked well for me is every time I take, a section of the day and head out for a hike or go off to that yoga class or get a massage that feels really nurturing to me, I'll say to myself, I'm doing this in honor of you, Mom. Because part of me really recognizes you would have given more to me if you could have, if more had been given to you.
Right.
And so every time I give it to myself, that's how we'll stay close.
Wow.
Even if it's just an internal closeness, instead of reaching out and having the same sort of conversation with her, or maybe she's not even here in physical form anymore. And so those are some of the ways we can really get over feeling stuck in maybe an unfulfilling relationship or a relationship with a parent that's already passed, that we don't have to live out that same, repetitious pattern, that there are ways we can absolutely be free.
So it seems like we're recognizing what that pattern is or what that relationship was or how it's affecting you, and then caring for yourself or nurturing yourself. I love that on behalf of that person. Does that still work if there was abuse involved, or is that a whole different realm?
I think that it is, because we go to a bit of a broader depth of understanding how mom parented or how dad behaved. How does that make sense to their background? And so, to be honest with you, Stacey, in the years of doing this, I have heard some of the most, make your hair curl, some of the things that, parents who, yes, love their children 99% of the time, do to harm their own kids. Hurt people end up hurting people. It bubbles over and it's got to go somewhere.
Right.
And all too often, it's to those people that are closest to us. And so beginning to recognize, gosh, the hurt was so big. There was so much there that it just continued on. It rippled over to the next generation. And I want to be the one that makes the difference, so this doesn't transfer down to my own kids.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about our current relationships, because I know there are people listening who are in love with a narcissist or sociopath, or they are co-parenting. Maybe they're out and they might be co-parenting with a difficult partner. What can you share with these folks to help them through this?
Yeah, this can be a really challenging road. I think the greatest position that we can take is really looking at the person we've created other people with, and their family history. So when I talk with clients who either have a narcissistic parent or partner, right away, what narcissist means to me is simply they don't have their mom or dad behind them. So they become like a hungry ghost out in front to their spouse, to often their kids, to their friends, even colleagues, to try to demand and draw in what it is they need, what it is they didn't get from their mom and dad. And so a narcissist is usually somebody who's had a very difficult upbringing, and they're now sort of trying to recruit others to fulfill what their mom and dad couldn't. And so your best position, if you're co-parenting with somebody like this, is to really look at what's influencing, what's behind their behaviors. So again, you don't get hooked you don't get tripped up by the same argument each and every single time, because straight away, you know where it's coming from, and you can actually hear what's being said differently.
And you can't fix it. You can't fix them, and you can't fix that, but you can look at the whole situation with a different perspective, like maybe 45-degree angle and say, I see
That's
what's
it.
happening here. Doesn't
That's it.
excuse
We're
it.
so much.
Yeah.
No, but we're less likely to get
Mm.
hooked. And I often give the metaphor of we've got that tug of war rope. And so one of us has got to set down that tug of war rope,
Mm-hmm.
or we're just going to exhaust each other.
Right.
And who gets lost in that? The children.
Yeah.
And so even if you're co-parenting with, my gosh, somebody who's incarcerated, somebody who's a narcissist, you name it, our kids do best when they have equal access to both parents.
Mm.
Because here's the truth of it. Chromosomally, biologically, your kids are half you and half the person you procreated with.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're, shunned or made wrong, often our kids will carry what we judge in them and we'll bring that forward.
Mm.
We really can't exclude anybody from the family system. Otherwise, it leaves something to be carried out in the next generation.
Mm. Wow. That's, that kind of leads me into the final question is, what suggestions do you have for those of us who still have those unresolved issues? Because we don't want to carry that on to our children. We don't want to pass that on to our children. I want to stop it right here and not, help them have a better future. So how can we do that?
Course. I think doing the exercise that I was sharing a little bit earlier. So maybe you do a little bit of your own family detective work. You become, you get out that genealogy and you begin to look at, okay, maybe you ask your mom, hey, like, what was growing up like for you? I know grandma as grandma, but what was she like as a mom?
Mm-hmm.
And what about grandpa? Was he around a lot? Was he always at work? Tell me about when you and dad first met. To ask also about dad's family history so that you're going to get more insight into how things ended up to be the way they were. Every family has got a few skeletons in the closet,
Oh, yeah.
the weird uncle or the aunt nobody wants to talk to. And so see what you can do to find out about that. I think that's the primary thing. And I often bring out that quote I love from Albert Einstein that says, none of us can solve a problem with the same mind that created it. And I think one of the greatest things that I appreciate about this work is that the clients who come to see me, they answer all my questions. They've got the facts, but they don't have maybe the fresh eye of how it all links together and how, this is the exact almost root or resolution that we're looking for to allow us to get out of that repetitive pattern.
Right.
So, sometimes it might be bringing in somebody with fresh eyes to take a look at how could you have a fresh perspective? How could you hold this differently? How do you reconcile something that's been with you for maybe decades so that it's not passed along to our kids? Because I'm a mom myself and, I get it. That's the last thing in the world I would want.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And these topics are often a little bit too adult to even talk to our kids about it. Are there other ways you can kind of inoculate your kids from like the trauma that you have experienced and help prepare them for adulthood?
Absolutely. So I think the more our kids know at an age appropriate time, the better.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it like a snowball picking up speed as it goes down the hill. The longer family secrets are kind of kept in the closet, the more propensity they have for showing up in the next generation. So the more openly you can speak about that. So for example, I had a very intense birth with my son. And so he's almost 10. And being able to talk with him about the experience at an age appropriate, I think we started talking about it when he was 3 or 4, an ambulance came. Oh, I got to ride in an ambulance. That was the highlight when he was 3 or 4. And then we talk about the separation
Right.
and how, dad was able to come in first, because here's what we know. It's stored in the body anyway. It's laid down. The children know. And so beyond that, things that might have happened to your parents or grandparents, how do you fill in the blanks so that your child sort of knows his or her own family history? I think that's the best way that we can protect our kids.
Right.
And then, of course, getting love flowing where it can.
Yeah.
So if you're separate from your children's father, how can you talk about how great it was when you first met? The things you really appreciated about him. Gosh, your dad knew how much I loved music, so we'd go to all the live concerts we could, or we'd play guitar around the campfire, whatever it was. That was those warm and fuzzy feelings when you first met, because that helps the child to know, oh wow, there is goodness, even though I'm seeing all this conflict now.
Right. Wow. Well, this has been a wealth of information, very, very interesting and fascinating, because we all have histories. And so you've given us action steps to take. I love that. Tell us, where can folks find more about you and your work?
Absolutely. So my website is www.joannalynn.ca, and it's a unique spelling, so I'll share it with your listeners. Johannalynn.ca. I'm over in Canada. And so you can also find me on Facebook under my name. I love to share the latest research and articles about epigenetics and neuroscience and all the good stuff we can do to really step in and empower ourselves to make the change that we're looking to do.
Fabulous. One more tool in our toolbox. Thank you so much, Joanna. I appreciate it.
Thank you.